My brother fooled everyone into believing I was embezzling from Grandma's account, until the bank's surveillance footage exposed the true culprit. I should have known something was wrong when my brother started being nice to me. For 23 years, Ethan had made my life miserable. He was the golden child, star athlete, honor roll student, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. I was the screw-up who dropped out of college and moved back home to help care for Grandma Eleanor after her stroke. Grandma was 91 and sharp as ever, but her mobility was limited. I'd moved into her guest room to help with daily tasks, grocery shopping, doctor appointments, managing her medications. She'd wake up at 5 a.m. wanting coffee and would forget she'd already asked me 3 times. Some days she'd insist on wearing her church dress to physical therapy. Other days she'd refuse to eat anything except vanilla wafers. But I loved her fiercely, and she was the only family member who'd never made me feel like a disappointment. The guest room had become my sanctuary. Grandma had let me paint the walls sage green and hang my amateur photography on every surface. She'd bought me a small desk where I worked on freelance graphic design projects. Nothing glamorous, mostly social media posts for local businesses, but it was something. She never made me feel ashamed about my unconventional path. Success isn't about impressing other people, she'd tell me while we watched her afternoon soap operas. It's about being useful to the people who matter. Those words would prove more prophetic than either of us could have imagined. Growing up, Ethan had perfected the art of making me look bad while appearing innocent. In elementary school, he'd break something and hide the evidence in my backpack. When Mom found it, he'd look shocked and suggest maybe I was acting out because I felt overshadowed by his achievements. The pattern continued through high school. Stolen homework, missing money, damaged property. Always with Ethan playing the concerned brother, worried about my troubling behavior. He was brilliant at gaslighting. He'd do something cruel, then convince everyone, including me, that I was overreacting or misremembering what happened. By the time I was a teenager, I'd started doubting my own perceptions of events. The only person who'd ever seen through his act was Grandma Eleanor. "That boy's got the devil's own tongue," she'd whisper to me during family gatherings. "Smooth as silk but twice as dangerous. You watch yourself around him." I dismissed her warnings as the ramblings of an old woman who played favorites. Now I realize she'd been trying to protect me all along. That's when the family meetings started. "We need to talk about Mom's finances," Dad announced during Sunday dinner, his voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment I knew so well. "Her account is missing significant amounts." My stomach dropped like I'd been punched. "What do you mean missing?" Mom pulled out bank statements, her face grim and accusatory. $3,000 in the past 2 months, unauthorized withdrawals, large amounts taken out almost daily. The papers scattered across the dining room table like evidence at a crime scene. Each transaction highlighted in yellow marker. Each withdrawal circled in red ink. The dates and times were written in Mom's precise handwriting along the margins. Ethan leaned forward, his expression perfectly concerned, like he'd practiced this moment in front of a mirror. "Who has access to her account besides Grandma?" All eyes turned to me. The weight of their stares felt crushing. "Just me and Grandma," I said quietly, my voice barely audible. "And obviously Mom's not taking her own money," Ethan said with fake sympathy that made my skin crawl. "She can barely remember what day it is. This is really hard for all of us, but we have to face facts." Dad's voice was ice cold, the same tone he'd used when I crashed his car at 17. "We trusted you. We let you live there rent-free, gave you responsibility, and this is how you repay us." I tried explaining that I only used her card for groceries and prescriptions, always with receipts that I kept in a shoebox by my bed, but the evidence seemed damning. The withdrawals were happening during times when I was supposedly the only one there. Always from the ATM closest to her house. Always in amounts just under $200 to avoid triggering fraud alerts. "Maybe you have a gambling problem," Mom suggested gently, her voice dripping with false compassion. "Or drugs. We can get you help. There's no shame in admitting you need treatment." "I'm not stealing from Grandma," I insisted, but my voice sounded weak even to myself. Ethan put his hand on my shoulder, and I wanted to shrug it off violently. "The first step is admitting you have a problem. We've all seen the signs, the late nights, the secretive behavior, the way you've been avoiding family gatherings." "What late nights? What secretive behavior?" I spent most evenings playing Scrabble with Grandma and watching game shows. The only family gatherings I'd missed were ones where Ethan would inevitably make some cutting remark about my life choices, but I could see the doubt spreading across their faces like poison. Every innocent explanation I offered seemed to make me look more guilty. The timing matches perfectly, Uncle David pointed out. He'd driven over specifically for this intervention, bringing his wife Sarah, who kept shaking her head sadly. The withdrawals started right after you moved in. Because that's when I started helping her with errands, I protested. Of course, there would be more activity on her account. $3,000 worth of activity? Aunt Sarah asked. For an elderly woman who barely leaves the house. Ethan had prepared for this moment meticulously. He produced a folder containing what he called concerning patterns he'd noticed in my behavior over the past months. He documented times when I'd been evasive about my whereabouts, occasions when I'd seemed unusually interested in Grandma's financial affairs, and instances of what he termed defensive behavior when asked innocent questions. I didn't want to say anything before, he said, his voice heavy with regret. But last month, I saw her going through Grandma's purse when she thought no one was looking. This was a complete lie, but it was delivered with such conviction that I saw doubt flicker across Mom's face. I was looking for her reading glasses, I said desperately. She'd asked me to find them. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Ethan asked gently. When Grandma was asleep, another lie, but a believable one. The family exchanged glances that said everything. Within a week, they'd moved Grandma to Golden Years Manor assisted living facility across town. I wasn't consulted about the decision. I came home from a grocery run to find movers loading her furniture into a truck. Where's Grandma? I asked Mom, panic rising in my throat. We found her a nice place where she'll be safe. Mom replied without looking at me. Professional caregivers who won't take advantage of her condition. The words hit like a slap. I was banned from visiting without supervision. They changed her bank account and removed my name completely. The family group chat buzzed constantly with messages about my betrayal, my addiction, my desperate need for intervention. Aunts and uncles I barely spoke to were suddenly experts on my supposed gambling problem. Cousin Jessica sent a long message about how addiction runs in families, and how she'd always worried about my unstable lifestyle. Uncle David shared articles about financial elder abuse. Even my teenage cousin posted on Facebook about being disappointed in family members who take advantage of vulnerable people. The social media aspect was particularly brutal. Family friends started treating me differently at the grocery store. Neighbors whispered when I walked by. Ethan had somehow managed to spread the story through our entire social circle without appearing to gossip. He'd simply shared his concerns about my well-being with a few key people, knowing the information would spread like wildfire. I felt completely isolated, like I was drowning in quicksand. Even Grandma seemed to doubt me. I don't understand, she said during one supervised visit, her cloudy eyes searching my face. I thought I could trust you. I defended you to everyone, but the evidence is so clear. Her voice broke when she said it. This woman who'd raised me during summers, who taught me to make her famous apple pie, who'd been my biggest supporter through every failure. She was looking at me like I was a stranger. The supervised visits were humiliating. A nurse would sit in the corner taking notes on everything we discussed. I couldn't even hug my grandmother without feeling like I was being evaluated for signs of manipulation or coercion. The worst part was watching Ethan comfort everyone. He organized family meetings, researched treatment centers, and spoke eloquently about addiction being a disease that required professional help. He was the perfect concerned brother, stepping up when his family needed him most. I've been reading about this, he told a room full of relatives during one of his impromptu support groups. Financial addiction often starts small, borrowing a little here and there, thinking you'll pay it back, but it escalates quickly, especially when someone has access to vulnerable family members. He'd brought printouts from psychology websites and addiction treatment centers. He spoke with authority about intervention techniques and rehabilitation programs. Everyone hung on his every word. The important thing is that we get help before this destroys our family permanently, he continued. I know it's painful, but we have to think about protecting Mom first. He'd even created a timeline of my supposed descent into addiction, complete with dates and incidents that painted a picture of progressive moral deterioration. Most of the incidents were fabricated or grossly distorted, but they formed a compelling narrative that explained away any doubts family members might have had. During one particularly painful family meeting, he presented what he called intervention research. He'd contacted 3 different residential treatment facilities and gotten quotes for long-term care. He'd researched my legal options and spoken to a lawyer about conservatorship procedures. "I know this is expensive," he said, his voice choking with emotion, "but I'm willing to contribute significantly to the cost. We can't put a price on family." The manipulation was breathtaking. He was positioning himself as the sacrificial hero while painting me as the villain who'd torn the family apart. That's when I decided to prove my innocence. I spent 3 days at the bank, armed with printed transaction records and a desperate determination to clear my name. The first 2 managers brushed me off. Family disputes weren't their problem. But the third, an older woman named Deborah, actually listened. "You're saying someone else made these withdrawals using your grandmother's card?" she asked, studying my face carefully. "It's the only explanation. I never took that money. I can prove I was nowhere near that ATM on most of these dates." Deborah studied the records with the attention of someone who'd seen similar cases before. "These are all from the same ATM. Do you know our cameras keep footage for 90 days? My heart raced. "Can we check? Normally we'd need a police report." But she glanced around and lowered her voice. "My own daughter went through something similar. Family members stealing and blaming her. Let me see what I can do." Deborah disappeared for 20 minutes. When she returned, her expression was serious. "I can show you the footage, but if we find evidence of fraud, I'll have to file a report with our security department." "Please," I said, "I just want the truth." An hour later, Deborah called me into a small office with a computer screen. The room smelled like stale coffee and had motivational posters about customer service covering the walls. "These are the timestamps for the disputed transactions," she said, pulling up grainy security footage. "Let's start with the first one." The first video showed the ATM on a Tuesday afternoon. I watched the timestamp crawl forward until 2:47 p.m., the exact time of a $400 withdrawal. A figure approached the machine wearing a dark baseball cap and sunglasses, inserted a card, and made the transaction. It wasn't me, it was Ethan. "Oh my God," I whispered, my hands shaking as I gripped the edge of the desk. Deborah switched to the next transaction. Thursday morning, 11:23 a.m. There he was again, wearing different clothes but clearly recognizable. His distinctive walk, the way he held his shoulders, the expensive watch he always wore. It was unmistakably my brother. Video after video showed the same thing. Ethan using what had to be a duplicate of Grandma's card, systematically draining her account. He'd been smart about it, varying his clothing, approaching from different angles, keeping his face partially hidden, but he couldn't disguise his build or his mannerisms. "How did he get a duplicate card?" I asked, my voice hollow. Deborah's expression was grim. "He'd need her personal information and PIN. Does he have access to those?" The pieces fell into place like a horrifying jigsaw puzzle. Ethan had helped set up Grandma's online banking last year. He'd insisted on writing down her PIN for emergencies. He'd been the one suggesting she keep her card in the kitchen drawer instead of her purse because it was safer. He'd volunteered to help her with technology, installing banking apps on her phone that saved her login information. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. "I need copies of everything," I said, my voice stronger now. Deborah nodded grimly. "I'll also file a fraud report with our security department. This is identity theft and elder abuse. We take this very seriously." She burned the videos onto a disk and printed timestamps for each transaction. The evidence was overwhelming. 17 separate instances of fraud, all clearly showing Ethan's face. Deborah also provided me with additional documentation I hadn't known existed. The bank's fraud detection software had actually flagged several of the transactions as suspicious due to their timing and location patterns. However, since the transactions were under the daily limit and the account holder hadn't reported them, no action had been taken. "Your brother was very careful about staying under our automatic fraud triggers," Deborah explained. "But the pattern is clear once you know what to look for." Armed with video evidence and fraud documentation, I drove straight to the police station. My hands were still shaking as I walked through the doors, carrying the folder that would either vindicate me or destroy my family forever. The detective, a tired-looking man in his 50s named Miller, initially seemed skeptical. His desk was covered with case files and empty coffee cups, and he looked like he'd seen every family drama imaginable. Family disputes usually work themselves out, he said without looking up from his computer. Maybe try mediation first. This isn't a dispute, it's theft. I slid the video screenshots across his desk. My brother stole $3,000 from our 91-year-old grandmother and framed me for it. The detective's demeanor changed completely as he reviewed the evidence. He called over another officer, Sergeant Jones, and they spent 20 minutes going through every piece of documentation. This is pretty clear-cut, Miller said finally. Elder financial abuse, identity theft, fraud. How long has this been going on? The bank says 2 months, but now I'm wondering if it started earlier. He's had access to her information for over a year. Sergeant Jones pulled up Ethan's background information on their computer system. No prior arrests, but let's see what else we can find. They discovered that Ethan had recently applied for several credit cards using Grandma's address. He'd also changed the mailing address for her Social Security payments to a P.O. box he'd rented under a false name. Within an hour, Miller had opened a formal investigation. They would need to interview all parties and examine Grandma's complete financial records, going back 18 months. We'll need to interview all parties, he said. Don't alert your brother yet. We want to get his initial statement first. The investigation expanded quickly. Detective Miller contacted the Postal Service about the address changes and discovered Ethan had been intercepting Grandma's mail for months. He'd redirected her Medicare statements, tax documents, and bank correspondence to his P.O. box. They also found evidence that he'd been using her personal information to research reverse mortgage options and life insurance policies. He'd called several financial companies posing as her grandson, helping with estate planning. The scope of his deception was staggering. The next part was the hardest. Waiting. For 3 days I said nothing while the police built their case. I watched Ethan continue his concerned brother act, organizing another family intervention for my supposed gambling addiction. We found a really good residential treatment program, he told our parents over dinner. It's expensive, but we can't put a price on family. I'm willing to help with the costs. The irony was sickening. He was volunteering to pay for my treatment with money he'd stolen from our grandmother. He'd even prepared a speech about how addiction had taken me away from the person I used to be. How he'd noticed changes in my behavior months ago, but hadn't wanted to believe it. How the family needed to come together to support me through recovery. I blame myself, he said, his voice breaking with practiced emotion. I should have intervened sooner. I should have seen the signs. During one of these performances, he produced a journal he claimed to have been keeping about my concerning behaviors. The entries were dated going back 6 months and described instances of me being secretive about finances, defensive when questioned, and evasive about my daily activities. The journal was entirely fabricated, but it was written in Ethan's careful handwriting and looked authentic. He'd even smudged some entries to make them look older. I started documenting things because I was worried about bringing accusations without proof, he explained to our parents, but the pattern became undeniable. Mom cried. Dad put his arm around Ethan and praised him for his maturity and compassion. I sat there in silence, knowing that in a few days, their entire perception of reality would shatter. The family had started treating me like a dangerous addict. They spoke to me in careful, measured tones, avoided mentioning money in my presence, and watched my movements constantly. Uncle David had even suggested they stage a formal intervention with a professional counselor. We need to be prepared for denial and anger, Ethan told them, referencing pamphlets he'd collected from addiction treatment centers. The disease makes people manipulative and dishonest. On Friday, Detective Miller called. We're ready to make an arrest. Can you gather your family for a meeting? I'd like to present our findings to everyone at once. I called Dad and suggested a family meeting at Grandma's old house. The assisted living facility had let us keep it for another month while they sorted out her belongings. I want to show you all something important, I said about the missing money. They arrived expecting another confession, another plea for help. Ethan had brought brochures for treatment centers and a folder of research about addiction recovery. He'd prepared another speech about forgiveness and healing. Instead, they found Detective Miller waiting in the living room with a laptop and a folder full of evidence. What's going on? Ethan asked. But I could see fear flicker behind his eyes for just a moment before the concerned mask slipped back into place. We've completed our investigation into the missing funds from Mrs. Eleanor's account, the detective announced, and we've identified the perpetrator. He opened his laptop and showed the bank footage. The first video played Ethan at the ATM clear as day. The room erupted. "That's impossible," Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dad just stared at the screen in shock, his face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and horror. Ethan's face went white, but he tried to maintain his composure. "This is some kind of mistake. That's not me. The video quality is terrible. That could be anyone. We have 17 different instances," Detective Miller continued, playing video after video, all showing the defendant using a duplicated bank card to steal from his grandmother's account. The detective had edited together a compilation that made the evidence undeniable. Different dates, different clothing, but always the same person. Always Ethan. Furthermore, Miller continued, "We've discovered that Mr. Harris has been intercepting his grandmother's mail, redirecting her financial statements, and using her personal information to apply for credit cards and research financial products. He spread out photocopies of credit card applications, postal service change of address forms, and phone records showing calls to various financial institutions." "You're lying," Ethan shouted, his careful facade finally cracking. He lunged toward the laptop as if he could somehow delete the evidence. Two officers who'd been waiting outside stepped into the room. "Ethan Harris, you're under arrest for elder financial abuse, identity theft, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud." As they read him his rights, Ethan's mask slipped completely. He looked directly at me with pure undiluted hatred. "You did this," he snarled. "You turned them against me. You've always been jealous, always trying to destroy what I built." "No," I said calmly, my voice steadier than I felt. "You did this when you decided to steal from our grandmother and frame me for it." But he wasn't done. As the officers cuffed him, he continued his rant. "I was protecting her money from you. I was keeping it safe until she really needed it. You would have wasted it all on your pathetic little projects. At least I was going to put it to good use." The delusion was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed, he was trying to paint himself as the hero. "I was going to pay it all back with interest," he continued, his voice getting more desperate. "I had investments lined up. This was just temporary borrowing. If you hadn't gone to the police like a vindictive little—" "That's enough," Detective Miller interrupted. "Save it for your lawyer." Mom was crying hysterically. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. After they took Ethan away, the room fell silent except for Mom's sobbing. "I'm so sorry," Dad finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "We should have believed you. We should have investigated before making accusations." "How did he get her card information?" Mom asked between sobs. I explained everything. How Ethan had volunteered to help with Grandma's banking. How he'd convinced her to write down her PIN. How he'd gradually gained access to all her financial information under the guise of helping her navigate technology. "He's been planning this for over a year," I said. "The only thing he didn't plan on was getting caught on camera." Detective Miller had left copies of all the evidence. As we reviewed it together, the full scope of Ethan's manipulation became clear. He hadn't just stolen the money. He'd orchestrated the entire frame job. The timing of his accusations, his sudden concern for family finances, his push to move Grandma to assisted living. It was all designed to isolate me and make me look guilty while he continued stealing. "He was going to let you take the blame for everything," Mom said, her voice hollow with realization. The detective's investigation had uncovered even more. Ethan had researched my daily routine, timing the withdrawals for when I was most likely to be at the house. He'd made sure the ATM was close enough to seem plausible, but far enough that I wouldn't accidentally witness the transactions. He'd even planted small seeds of doubt about my character in family conversations for months before the accusation started. Casual comments about my irresponsible lifestyle, my financial struggles, my unpredictable behavior. He'd been setting the stage for my downfall long before the first dollar went missing. We drove to Golden Years Manor to tell Grandma the truth. She was in the common room staring out the window with the same lost expression she'd worn since moving there. When we explained what had really happened, she cried, not from sadness but from relief. I knew you wouldn't steal from me, she said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. But the evidence seemed so strong, I started to doubt my own judgment, my own memories. She'd been carrying guilt about doubting me, wondering if her stroke had affected her ability to read people's character. The relief in her eyes was heartbreaking. Can I come home now? She asked. The facility director, who'd overheard our conversation, was professional but clearly shaken. We've seen cases like this before, she said quietly. Family members using placement as a way to gain control of assets. I'm sorry we didn't catch the red flags. 3 weeks later, Ethan pleaded guilty to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more of his schemes. His lawyer had advised him that the evidence was overwhelming, and a jury would likely impose a harsher sentence after seeing the full extent of his manipulation. The investigation revealed he'd also been overcharging Grandma for home repairs and pocketing the difference. He'd convinced her to pay for a new roof that cost half what he'd claimed. He'd charged her for plumbing work that was never done. He'd even billed her for landscaping services and pocketed the money while doing the work himself. His entire relationship with our grandmother had been transactional, a long-term con designed to separate her from her money. The prosecution presented evidence that Ethan had been planning to have Grandma declared incompetent, so he could gain power of attorney over her finances. He'd already consulted with lawyers about conservatorship procedures, and had been documenting what he called her declining mental capacity. His plan was to gradually isolate her from family members who might question his actions, gain legal control of her assets, and then systematically drain her accounts while she was helpless to stop him. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay full restitution. The judge was particularly harsh in her criticism. Elder abuse is one of the most despicable crimes, she said, her voice echoing through the courtroom. You betrayed the trust of a vulnerable family member and attempted to destroy your sibling's reputation to cover your tracks. This court finds your actions particularly heinous because of the calculated nature of your deception. The judge also ordered him to undergo psychological evaluation and complete courses on elder abuse awareness. He was prohibited from having any contact with elderly family members without supervision upon his release. Ethan never looked at me during the proceedings. Even his lawyer seemed disgusted by the evidence. The local newspaper picked up the story, running a front-page article about elder financial abuse in our community. Ethan's mugshot appeared alongside statistics about family members who steal from elderly relatives. The story mentioned that I had been falsely accused and vindicated by security footage. The public humiliation was devastating for someone who'd built his identity around being the perfect son and community member. After court, our family gathered at Grandma's house, the one she decided to move back to immediately after his arrest. I'm not letting anyone scare me out of my own home again, she declared, settling back into her favorite armchair like she'd never left. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a dark presence had been lifted. Grandma immediately began redecorating, replacing items that reminded her of Ethan's help with new purchases that reflected her own preferences. Dad pulled me aside later that evening. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know how wrong we were. How wrong I was. You believed the evidence, I said. It looked convincing. No. He shook his head, his eyes red with unshed tears. We believed him because we wanted to. Because it was easier than admitting our golden child was capable of something this evil. We took the easy path instead of asking hard questions. Dad had been particularly devastated by the revelation. He'd built his relationship with Ethan around pride in his son's achievements and moral character. Learning that it was all a facade had shattered his sense of reality. I keep thinking about all the times he manipulated situations, Dad said. All the times he made you look bad and I believed him without question. How many years of your life did I waste doubting you because of his lies? Mom joined us, her eyes still swollen from crying. Can you forgive us? We're family, I said. We'll figure it out. But forgiveness didn't come immediately. It took months of family therapy, honest conversations, and rebuilt trust. Dad had to confront his favoritism. Mom had to acknowledge how her need to see the best in Ethan had blinded her to red flags. The hardest part was helping them understand that their golden child had never really existed. The Ethan they'd idolized was a carefully constructed facade, designed to manipulate their emotions and extract maximum benefit. Family therapy sessions were brutal but necessary. Our counselor, Dr. Reynolds, specialized in family trauma and manipulation dynamics. She helped us understand how Ethan had used classic manipulation techniques to control family narratives for years. Narcissistic family members often create what we call a golden child persona, Dr. Reynolds explained. They present themselves as perfect while systematically undermining other family members to maintain their elevated status. She walked us through examples of Ethan's manipulation going back to our childhood. The broken vase blamed on me. The missing homework that mysteriously appeared in my backpack. The constant subtle undermining of my achievements while highlighting his own. The goal is to become the family's central figure, the one everyone turns to, trusts, and admires, she continued. This gives them enormous power to control information and manipulate situations. The therapy helped, but the damage ran deep. Mom struggled with guilt about the years she prioritized Ethan's needs over mine. Dad grappled with the realization that his favoritism had enabled Ethan's behavior and hurt me profoundly. I taught him that he could get away with anything as long as he presented it the right way, Dad admitted during one particularly difficult session. I rewarded his manipulation without realizing what I was doing. 6 months later, Grandma asked me to move back in with her. Not as a caregiver, but as her roommate and business partner. She decided to start a small consulting business, helping other elderly people avoid financial scams. Who better to help than someone who's seen it all? She said with a grin. We printed business cards that read, Eleanor's Alliance, protecting seniors from financial predators. She'd give presentations at community centers about warning signs of elder abuse. I'd handled the technology side, websites, social media, online resources. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Ethan's attempt to destroy my life had actually led to something better than I'd ever imagined. Our first client was Mrs. Davies from down the street. Her son had been slowly draining her checking account while promising to invest the money for her retirement. He'd convinced her to sign documents giving him access to her accounts, then systematically transferred money to his own investments. I trusted him completely, Mrs. Davies said, tears streaming down her face. He's my only child. I never thought he'd steal from me. We helped her document the theft and contact authorities. The pattern was eerily similar to Ethan's scheme. Gradual access to financial information, manipulation of trust, and systematic theft disguised as helpful financial management. Her son was arrested within a week. Word spread quickly through the senior community. We started getting calls from across the state. Elderly people who suspected family members of financial abuse, but didn't know how to prove it or where to turn for help. Grandma thrived in her new role as an advocate. Her sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude made her incredibly effective at spotting scams and manipulative behavior. I won't let what happened to me happen to anyone else, she'd tell our clients. These predators count on us being too embarrassed or confused to fight back. Our second client was Mr. Thomas, whose daughter-in-law had been forging his signature on checks and withdrawing money from his savings account. She'd convinced him that he was becoming forgetful and needed her help managing his finances. She'd show me bank statements that didn't match my records, he explained. When I questioned the discrepancies, she'd say I was confused because of my age. Eventually, I started believing her. The psychological manipulation was as damaging as the financial theft. These predators didn't just steal money. They stole their victims' confidence in their own mental abilities. Our third case involved a grandmother whose grandson had convinced her to take out a reverse mortgage to help him start a business. He'd pocketed the money and disappeared, leaving her homeless and financially devastated. Each case we handled revealed new tactics that financial predators used against elderly family members. We began documenting these patterns and sharing information with law enforcement and social services. Within a year, we'd helped prosecute 12 cases of elder financial abuse. Our success rate caught the attention of the State Attorney General's office, which invited us to participate in a task force on elder protection. Grandma became a minor celebrity in senior advocacy circles. She testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger elder abuse protections and appeared on local news programs to educate seniors about warning signs of financial exploitation. The best defense is education, she'd say during interviews. When seniors know what to look for, predators can't take advantage of them. Meanwhile, Reports from prison indicated that Ethan was struggling with incarceration. He'd been placed in protective custody after other inmates learned about his crimes against an elderly family member. Apparently, even criminals have standards when it comes to elder abuse. His cellmate told prison officials that Ethan spent most of his time writing letters, not to family members, but to lawyers and journalists, trying to convince them that he'd been wrongfully convicted. He claimed the bank videos were doctored, and that I had somehow orchestrated an elaborate frame job. The delusion was complete, even in prison, facing the consequences of his actions. He couldn't accept responsibility for what he'd done. Last week I got a letter from Ethan in prison. It was 3 pages of self-pity and blame. How the family had driven him to steal. How I'd ruined his life by pressing charges. How everyone would see the truth eventually. He claimed he'd been planning to pay the money back once his investments matured. He said he'd only framed me to protect the family from embarrassment while he sorted out the financial situation. He insisted that if I just talked to him privately instead of involving the police, everything could have been resolved quietly. The letter was full of phrases like, "If you really cared about family, and your vindictive nature has destroyed everything." Even from prison, he was still trying to manipulate the narrative. He wrote about how difficult prison was for someone falsely accused, and how the other inmates treated him poorly, because they didn't understand the complex family dynamics that had led to his situation. "I'm surrounded by real criminals," he wrote. "People who actually intended to hurt others. I was trying to help the family, even if my methods were unconventional." The letter ended with a request for money for commissary items and books, along with a veiled threat about what he might do when he was released if the family didn't support him during his incarceration. I threw it away without finishing it, but not before showing it to Dr. Reynolds during our family therapy session. "Classic manipulation," she said after reading excerpts. "He's trying to maintain control even from prison. The threats, the guilt trips, the attempts to rewrite history. It's all textbook narcissistic behavior. Some people never learn, but the rest of us do. Mom and Dad visit regularly now, and our relationship is stronger than it's ever been. They've had to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their parenting, but that honesty has brought us closer together. Uncle David and Aunt Sarah publicly apologized for their accusations and donated money to our anti-fraud business. Cousin Jessica deleted her Facebook post and wrote a long apology message about jumping to conclusions. The family group chat now shares articles about financial literacy and elder protection, instead of gossip and accusations. Dr. Reynolds helped us understand that healing from family manipulation takes time. There are still moments when old patterns resurface. When Dad automatically takes Ethan's side before catching himself, or when Mom makes excuses for behavior that hurt me. But the difference now is awareness. We recognize these patterns and address them directly instead of pretending they don't exist. The local community has also been transformed by our experience. The Senior Center now offers monthly workshops on financial protection. The police department created a specialized elder abuse unit. Local banks implemented additional security measures for elderly customers. Our story became a case study in how financial predators operate within families, and how communities can work together to protect vulnerable members. Grandma's advocacy work has expanded beyond individual cases. She now consults with banks, law enforcement agencies, and social service organizations about identifying and preventing elder financial abuse. The predators are getting smarter, she tells audiences during her presentations. But so are we. Knowledge is our best weapon against these criminals. These days, when someone's story seems too convenient, when the evidence points a little too neatly in one direction, I remember those bank cameras. Sometimes the truth is hiding in plain sight. You just have to know where to look. And sometimes the person you trust most is the one you should watch most carefully. The business has grown beyond our wildest expectations. We now have 3 part-time employees and a waiting list of clients. We've helped recover over $200,000 in stolen funds and prevented countless additional thefts through education and early intervention. Grandma jokes that Ethan inadvertently gave her the best retirement career she could have imagined. "He thought he was destroying our lives," she says. "Instead, he gave us a purpose we never knew we needed." Last month, we received a commendation from the governor for our work in elder protection. Grandma insisted on accepting the award wearing the same dress she'd worn to Ethan's sentencing, A small act of defiance that made us both smile. The irony of the situation still amazes me. Ethan's attempt to manipulate and control our family ultimately led to his own downfall and created something beautiful from the wreckage of his deception. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes the very tools predators use to harm others become the instruments of their own destruction. And sometimes the family member everyone thinks is the problem turns out to be the solution everyone needed.